One of the nice features that the TRIGKEY Speed 5 actually has is that in the BIOS you can actually adjust the TDP of the system. So what I decided to do was to just go absolutely crazy with it and set a TDP of 45 watts. That pretty much is matching the TDP set for the B-Link SCER6 with the Ryzen 5 6600H. Going from a TDP of 25 watts up to 45 watts is a pretty massive jump, but let's see what it actually does to our performance. So the biggest takeaways in terms of performance is that at the stock 25 watt TDP in Cinebench R23 we get a score of 7,137. Now pulling from the wall, that is 40 watts. So while the TDP is set to 25 watts, what the whole system is pulling from the wall using a watt meter is 40 watts. By raising the TDP up to 45 watts, we actually end up getting a Cinebench R23 score of 7835, and we're pulling 56 watts from the wall. So raising the TDP immediately gave us a pretty massive increase in terms of CPU performance, specifically in multi-threaded applications. Our single core pretty much stayed identical throughout all of these tests, and it makes sense because one singular core on this system does not need a full 45 watts in it. So we're pretty much reaching max clocks pretty much immediately on any single threaded situation. Now I decided to also do some gaming benchmarks just to really see if there was any kind of uplift that came from this higher TDP. And as you can see here with the Division 2, there is practically no difference. Now you're going to see in fact the lower FPS average and lower 1% lows, but it's just by 1 FPS and it's pretty much just margin of error. So what that really just tells you is that this higher TDP does absolutely nothing in this game. It's certainly using more power, and you'll see that the CPU is clocking itself to its max clock speed most of the time. That's not really giving us any improvements whatsoever because the limiting factor is the iGPU, and that isn't going past the 1800 megahertz that it's reaching at both TDPs. But to continue on the testing here, we have Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Again, with the built-in benchmark, we are seeing no difference in performance whatsoever. You will see that the system is again using more power, and that CPU is clocking up to its maximum clock speed most of the time, but this is not giving us any tangible benefit. And like I said before, it all comes down to the fact that the iGPU is just reaching its maximum clock speed and it can't go any further past that. It is a limitation of the fact that this is just a locked skew. So what that means is that there is no ability to squeeze out any more performance than what it's just programmed to run at. And as a consequence of that, you can see here in Assassin's Creed Origins, we see no real improvement whatsoever. And again, another situation where we are using more wattage. It is making the system run noticeably hotter, and we gain absolutely nothing from this. So it really goes to show that the 5500U is for the most part just tuned to run at a 15 to 25 watt TDP range because you get most of the performance within that range. These way higher TDPs would actually yield some improvements in performance if the GPU had an unlocked clock speed that was just based off of the amount of power it can get, and if the CPU operated the same way. Unfortunately, because it's a U-series CPU, it's really locked down and there's not much you can really do about it. I've already tried messing with the APU tuning utility and it just does not let me push this thing further than what it's rated to run at. Now, this is nice to see just in the fact that if you're on a system that can't really allocate more towards a higher TDP because of cooling reasons, well, you don't need to. You're gaining nothing from a higher TDP. So in general, it's actually really nice that this APU is able to give you most of its performance at a much lower wattage. And I think it's part of the reason why the 5500U has just stuck around for so long. It's so energy efficient. It gives you really great performance. The stats on it on paper alone are just fantastic. I mean, 6 cores, 12 threads, Zen 2 IPC, an iGPU that was still competitive even with a new generation that came after it. The 5500 5500U is really just all around a really impressive chip, just for how efficient it really is. As you can see here, even in Mountain Blade Bannerlord, a game that really seems to love CPU clock speed, was not benefiting at all from this increase in terms of CPU performance. It was certainly utilizing the CPU, and that higher clock speed, I'm sure, was nice for it to have in terms of, you know, making the task that it's doing a lot easier. But none of that really matters if it has to wait on the iGPU, and that's exactly what was happening here. So we were just generating a lot of heat, making more noise for no increase in terms of performance. And I think that the main takeaway in all of this is the fact that the TRIGKEY mini PC here is pretty much perfectly optimized for the hardware that it has in there. 25 watts seems to be the most ideal sweet spot for the Ryzen 5 5500U. Really, if you can get up to 20 watts, anywhere between 20 to 25 is already going to give you a nice boost in performance, and that's about all you really need. Anything past that is just going to be extreme diminishing returns. And it really just goes to show that the 5500U is just such a wonderfully efficient and powerful system. It's really hard to compete with this, and it really seems like both AMD and Intel are not interested in truly competing in the price category where this system is really found in. On Amazon right now, there is pretty much only one other Ryzen system that is actually under $200, which, by the way, if you're interested in me taking a look at that system, let me know down below. I'm thinking about picking it up, but I don't know how interested you guys are in something that's that budget. But besides that, this is the cheapest that an AMD Ryzen system really gets. And Intel, throughout most of this price category, is just competing with the equivalent of Celerons and Pentiums. And Intel seems to be so afraid of any actual meaningful improvement in the low end of the market that they had to artificially nerf their low-end processors by locking them down to just single-channel memory. But what that means is that all of the Intel CPUs that are competing with this system in this price range are all extremely weak. And even the ones that can give comparable CPU performance are bogged down by iGPUs that are at this point multiple generations old, to the point where Intel no longer even releases new drivers for them. So this is pretty much it when it comes to a budget mini PC. Everything else around it and everything else above it really doesn't provide the same level of value that this currently has. To get a meaningful upgrade, you have to pretty much shell out double or even triple the price of this specific system. So definitely keep an eye out on these things for Black Friday, because I get the feeling that there's going to be some crazy deals on some of these mini PCs. But I'll catch you guys next time.